Well, well, well. Today we're going to talk about something that I think we've all experienced, we've all witnessed, we've all been guilty of or done ourselves, and that's hypocrisy. I want to talk about and explore why it gets under our skin. And personally, man, it's really been bugging me lately. It's one of those things that affects our personal world, our individual lives, as well as those in our immediate environment, into our community, and into our society, without a doubt. And the effects are not good. So I want to explore what it is, what are those effects, and how can we start mitigating what I'll talk about later, which is the misalignment of um, what we call hypocrisy. I think, first of all, we're wired for patterns, seeing patterns, creating patterns, and therefore we're also wired for inconsistencies, right? Those hiccups in the rhythm, in the pattern, the things that just stand out there. That's the definition of anomaly. It does not belong where it's found. We like patterns, and anything that breaks them calls our attention. The discrepancy between what is stated and what actually is. That's that hiccup, that strange little interruption. Trust is essential for relationships. And when someone says one thing but does another, our brains pick up on that immediately, even subconsciously. And we sense conflict, not only in the person we're with, but that now emanates into the environment and thus our relationship. So, what is hypocrisy? The definition is the act of claiming to have moral standards or beliefs that one's own behavior does not meet. And this is really interesting because we're bringing in morality. Morality is knowing between right and wrong. And that's a socially constructed phenomenon, right? But we are where we are, right? And we are products of our culture, of our environment, of our home life, of those around us. And morality is an accepted behavior that is either good or bad, right or wrong. So, in a nutshell, it brings in that morality, which I really think is interesting because that just makes it even much more complex. Having moral standards or beliefs that one's own behavior does not meet. So I s- I say one thing, but I do another. A fair question, are we ever not a hypocrite? No. Hypocrisy, let's put it on a spectrum. All the time, barely ever. And I think amidst those two extremes is the norm. At least most people I know, and I'll talk about that in a while, are pretty trustworthy, are pretty true to themselves. A lot of people that I see in social media, that I see in the media, that I see in politics, certain figureheads, leaders of ideology, of organizations, it's almost like they're setting themselves up for failure because the higher you rise with this moral standard, the clearer or perhaps easier it is for you to falter because we're human, right? To err is to be human. We're not perfect. We can, I think what's fair and what I always put on myself is to strive to be the best I can be, to strive to aligning my words and my actions, my behavior with my ideology. Are we ever not a hypocrite? No. I think it's near impossible to live such a life of total alignment and purity in especially in such a complex society. Inevitably, we're going to say one thing and yet do something else, and that's that contradiction. What is fair to strive for is to live as much as possible where our word is cousin to the deed. Chaucer wrote that in his Canterbury Tales, where he loved watching people. He was into politics and a diplomat himself, and his Canterbury Tales were stories of these characters that represented society. And they would first have a prologue, they would first talk about themselves, and then they would tell their story. And a good reader would analyze how they talked about themselves as a figure in society and then the characters in their stories and how they either aligned or did not. And more often than not, there were the discrepancies. And I think that's the complexity of humanity. I think that's the complexity of society. I think that's where he most enjoyed observing and writing about. But anyway, the word is cousin to the deed. They are aligned. That is, our words and behaviors align. This alignment makes us transparent. What you see is what you get. And this makes us confident, trustworthy, charismatic, and dare I say, virtuous because there's no surprises. How I speak and how I behave are in such a way that it's authentic, right? You're not, as my students would always say, you're not being fake. Maybe this is why hypocrites annoy us so much because it almost feels personal when we're talking with them, when we're listening to them, that they say one thing and yet do another. It's just fake. It's like insulting, almost like a gesture of disrespect. When someone claims to stand for something, let's say honesty, kindness, compassion, justice, but behaves in the opposite way, it does feel like a betrayal. They've betrayed our trust, our believability in anything consistent, anything respectful, any integrity. And especially when that person holds power or influence, it's harder because you stand for ideologies beyond yourself. I think it's really hard to be a leader because of the multitude of pressures that are on you, the influences that are affecting you, and to stay true to yourself. Boy, that's a tough one. But those are the rules, right? That's what comes with those positions. Hypocrites, strangely enough, also make us feel uncomfortable, right? Because it reflects something in us. We might recognize our own gap between what we believe and how we act, and that's not always easy to face, right? We get triggered. And if we pause and find some quiet space to think about, why am I so triggered by that? Why does that annoy me so much? Maybe we're seeing part of ourselves in that other person and acknowledging, right? It's always easier to critique others than ourselves, but use that dynamic. So if something's triggering you, then fair enough to maybe it's because I'm seeing part of myself in them and I don't like that. So therefore, that's something to work on, right? The discomfort is important. It signals that we care about integrity. And this pushes us to critically look inward in a self reflective way to remind ourselves that maybe we need to adjust a degree this way or that to better align our beliefs, words, and behaviors. So now we are as true as we can be to ourselves and therefore everybody else. And being open to this criticism and guidance of yourself and others is also essential when we stray from our root source of virtue, of character, of principle, morality, and ethics, right? Who are you? Simple sounding question, but it takes a good long time to figure that out, to create that person that you believe in, that you know is true, whose words will, jettison themselves out of your body and you're willing to stand behind them. A lot of people, right, especially in social media, just keyboard warriors. They talk a lot of stupid smack and yet say it to my face. It's a different story. And most people, and I even find myself definitely doing this, and I offer my strong hearted opinion. If put face to face with that situation, would I fulfill that belief? Would I act upon it? Would I be aligned? And sometimes I don't know. We are only as strong or weak as our discipline is to our principles and moral compass. We are only as strong or weak as our discipline is, as we can hold ourselves to that line, to that belief, and let our actions back it up. We're only as good or terrible as the people we choose to have around us, as they will both influence as well as reflect our character. Who you choose to be around will dramatically affect your character. And if you are now in a group whose behavior does not align to your principles, you're in conflict with yourself and ultimately with the rest of that group. So you really need, I guess, to be careful, right? Be careful who you hang out with because of how easily we're influenced by our environment. So, what kind of damage can hypocrisy do? Let's talk about the impact because hypocrisy isn't just annoying, it's actually harmful. On a personal level, it creates inner conflict. People who live with a split between their words and actions often experience guilt, conflict, anxiety. Over time, they might stop noticing or just become skilled at covering it up. Delusional is the word, right? Where we lie. We've come to the point where we lie to ourselves, right? But that disconnect is what leads to burnout, isolation, and even confused sense of identity. So why burnout? Because you're working harder to maintain that facade. Why isolation? Because you're fake and no one actually trusts or likes you, at least to your face. And why a confused sense of identity? Because you've created a self imposed matrix where you cherry pick your decisions based on what is most convenient to you, not looking at the whole tree, right? You've taken that one element of that one issue and refuse to accept that it's part of a bigger picture. So if we are cherry picking, we're taking that one cherry, right? But we're forgetting the whole tree, the broader expanse of the connection and implication to other people, bigger picture, bigger ideas. We're not being true. Again, we're not being true to ourselves. When you're selective, right, for convenience, which I think is one ingredient to hypocrisy. You are prioritizing your very personal, very individual need over everybody else. I've talked about this. I try and I teach this. I try and live by this that you have to look out for yourself. The difference is when you are being a hypocrite, you're professing your ideology, your specific need, right? What is for convenience, what is due to your particular upbringing, whatever, and in an haughty, arrogant way saying everybody else should believe what I believe. And there you have made the most lethal combination, which is arrogant and ignorant. You think y- everybody should believe what you believe. Eh, You do you. And you don't need to profess it in such a way that you have now assumed a mightier than thou position or attitude to to actually believe that your belief should be assumed by everybody else. I think that's another ingredient in hypocrisy, right? Is that arrogance and to believe that, to be so stupid to believe that it's your way or the highway, everybody else is wrong, but that's ignorant. You should know better. In communities, hypocrisy erodes trust. Think of a leader who speaks out about fairness but plays favorites. Think of a teacher who preaches respect but mocks kids to their face or behind their back. Think of politicians who profess one thing on their soapbox to get elected and then flip. The result is people stop believing, people stop trusting, people therefore start disengaging, and worse, they might even start assuming that same behavior. And even a bigger picture from community to now society, it also creates cynicism when public figures, politicians, influencers of whatever lifestyle, activists, are exposed as hypocrites. the ripple effect is huge. People tune out, movements lose steam. We stop expecting sincerity and start assuming everybody's just performing, right? It's performative. It's just for the show. And we mock it, we maybe cancel it, but it permeates and it affects us. For politics, we don't vote anymore, right? Because they're all liars, they're all cheats, they're all hypocrites. Um, we might lose faith, right? In a religious leader who has preached one thing and behaved another way, right? These are profound societal effects, and the cynicism is sharp and bitter and ugly, right? And it just kind of permeates everyone. And once all of this happens, genuine efforts are harder to recognize, genuine efforts, that is people who are true, right? And say one thing and act in accordance with those beliefs. We don't meet them with from a place of trust, but mistrust. And once that happens, genuine efforts are harder to recognize. Now we're carrying around that negativity, that kind of bitterness, that cynicism, that mistrust, and just apply it. Like that's you're kind of guilty before you've been given a chance to even say who you are, because now we just assume, yeah, you're going to say a whole bunch of things. I'm not going to trust it because you're just going to let me down. So, what's the result of all of this, right? We keep hitting yet another domino, these implications: disillusionment, disrespect, confusion, not just with the person, but with the system that they represent. We like to use that expression, well, there's always that one bad apple, to kind of dismiss that one person's behavior, but it almost seems like too often the bad apple now represents the whole group. So, how do we avoid being hypocrites? I think I've explained enough what it is, why it's bad, the negative consequences of it personally, with our own relationships, in our community, and societally. So, what can we do about it, right? How can we catch ourselves as often as possible to have our word cousin to the deed? First is just some honesty or integrity, right? Being honest with yourself, being honest with your own struggles. You don't have to pretend. Understanding, admitting that you're still growing, right? You're always going to continue growing. Therefore, you're continuing to learn things about yourselves, learn things about situations, becoming educated about issues. And so, sure, what you once professed and thoroughly believed in has changed because you are now informed. So, being honest and educating yourself. Check your alignment. Ask yourself regularly, right? Am I living in a way that matches my values? Is there a gap? And what is it, and how do I need to just adjust? Because I would say more often than not, we're just a couple degrees off here or there, right? It's not a complete makeover. It's adjustments along the way. Speak less and do more. Don't tell me you love me, show me. There's an expression, the proof is in the pudding, right? You can tell me about how delicious this pudding is, how all the ingredients and how to prepare it, etc. But the proof is like tasting it, right? It's that substance. So while I think words are extremely powerful, paradoxically, words are real cheap. We can be conned by words. We can be fooled by words. We can be manipulated and influenced by words. Behavior is, I think, closer to truth, right? They say so much of one's communication skills is in the body language. We look for those gestures, those small little clues to really assess validity, authenticity, transparency, truth. So speak less, do more, right? Just show up and let your actions speak for themselves. Invite accountability. Have people in your life that you can trust who will tell you the truth, right? The truth hurts. Well, it shouldn't hurt if you are open minded, if you want to grow, if you want to adjust and be the most transparent and truthful person possible. That kind of goes with trusting truth over image, right? That's integrity. Integrity is where you are being honest with yourself and you trust that substance, right? The character more than the facade. And in a time of social media, of AI, of these kind of layers of simulation, of projected message or image, we really need to discern. We really need to think and observe critically to kind of peel off those layers. And if we're talking about ourselves, right, how do we avoid be being hypocritical? We have to remove those layers ourselves so that, gosh, I'm suffering from FOMO or trying too hard to fit in or doing this not because I really believe in it but because I'm trying to be popular or accepted. That those are the layers that we can remove, and that's when we are choosing integrity over image. So, final reflection. We live in a time where appearances matter a lot. But when we trade authenticity for approval or performance for principle, we lose something vital. Hypocrisy might win applause in the short term, but it never builds lasting trust. So maybe the goal isn't perfection, but honesty. To be people who mean what we say, to own our missteps, and to strive to learn how to live with integrity as much and as often as possible. That seems realistic, doable, and fair. I want to thank you for listening, and I really want to put you to the test to try and peel off those layers as often as possible. Be comfortable with the discomfort because you're worth it. And to really note the types of relationships you have, right? Are they founded on hypocrisy? Are they founded on something fake? Are they founded on deceit or lies or delusion? Or are they founded on truth and trust and respect and sincerity and transparency? If this resonates with you, please leave a comment. Please subscribe. And if this makes you think of somebody for one reason or another, please share it with them. I'd really appreciate it. It'd really help me out a lot as well. And like Shakespeare said, above all else, to thine own self be true. Until then, take care.